they eat all the tops off of my carrots. I had the carrots growing, but they eat all the tops off the carrots. Oh, yeah. So the carrots don't develop because they eat all the tops off. But I do enjoy eating my food, but I just enjoy the process. Like working in the garden and all that kind of stuff. And there's so many agricultural references in the Bible. You appreciate them a little more when you have had a chance to do it. Oh man, I love it. I walk out there with a bowl and just take what I want to eat for lunch. Get my bowl and go in there and rinse it off and eat it. I love that. You eat like herbs and stuff. I mean, man, there's nothing like fresh herbs. Right? You don't need all of the salt and pepper and all that. You got to fresh herbs. I'll tell you what I got into last year. Oh.
Just heads up, I went ahead and started the live stream back up.
Oh, so just so you popping in. Okay, all right.
Just figured me out.
Yeah. Well, we're safe. We're gonna be okay. Last year though, I got into the thing is still not on though. Projected not on. I got into doing jarring jalapenos because I like jalapenos, but I can only eat so many at a time, and they grow pretty clear. So I started jarring them, and that was the best. That was the best. I mean, that was the highlight of everything for me, jarring jalapenos. Mason jars, just several, and everybody, like my kids don't know me, like they don't really they got the taste, they started liking it. Oh yeah.
I did a mile and some before I got it.
You got an extra mile. They were going through a lot of I should have had jalapenos like all through the winter. All through the winter. And I didn't make it out of December. They were gone. But that'll be something since I know that they like me.
That's right. Brain in the middle one. Plan for it.
You got it? I got it. Okay.
Testing. Well, again, it's about that time to begin. We hope everyone had a great lunch, and for those on live stream, we can only trust you ate too. So we're glad to have everyone back, and we won't go through a full introduction. If you've been on the live stream, and if as you're sitting here in class, you recognize that we've had Brother Otey here, and we've covered two great topics this morning, and now we're getting ready to go into communication. Communication, often a subject familiar to many, but so much to learn about communication as we deal with another person in our lives. So with that, and no further ado, Brother Otey.
All right, how y'all doing? Can y'all hear me? Okay, you can hear that. Okay, so just a quick synopsis of where we've been. This is the last session for today. Want to start off by just making sure we have a good understanding of what marriage is, so we think about the relationship in the proper context. That's what the whole idea of talking about covenant is. And then we wanted to just emphasize the principle that marriage involves some work. It has to be tended to. It's not the only thing in life that has to be tended to. We all know that. If you want something to prosper, you have to pay attention to it. You have to work at it. And some of the work is not necessarily glorious work, but it's necessary and it's worth doing because we're working for the reaping. We hope to reap something, so we're paying close attention to what we sow. And then, of course, in the process, there's going to be times where we have difficulties. There will be conflicts, and we don't want a conflict necessarily, and we certainly don't want a bunch of it, but it's going to happen because we're human. It's going to happen. So we just need to have some healthy attitudes about how to address those things. One of the keys for making the assessments of our marriage and making the improvements that we need to make, dealing with conflict and so forth, is communication. Communication is one of the big three reasons that marriages don't work: romance, finance, communication. Like if you just look across the nation at studies that are done, surveys and so forth, marriages don't work for those three reasons, okay? Communication, if you have people with a godly mindset, communication should be the mechanism through which you work through the other two kinds of problems that generally make marriages not work. You follow me? I mean, it doesn't mean if you're married, you know, there's going to be financial stresses and strains, and people are going to have different attitudes about saving and spending and all that. But if you have a godly mindset, you ought to be able to communicate your way through that. But what if you don't know how? You know what? When it comes to romance, everybody's not built the same. And when you get married, people have to talk through and work through those things. What if you don't know how? There will be tensions, difficulties, problems, and during those times, what you will notice is that there is sort of an expedited need to, an urgency to communicate. And then it's going to be abundantly clear to people, we don't know how. Because you have to, and you can't seem to get it done. But what I would say to you is, the way that you can know how to communicate during those exigent times is that you have good communication skills when there isn't an urgency, right? Where on a daily basis you practice and work at knowing how to talk to one another in constructive ways. So we definitely want to talk about marital communication, because communication is a key to successful relationships of all kinds. And certainly the most important relationship you'll have in this life. All right? All successful relationships, including marriage relationships, are built and maintained by strong communication. But communication is one of the biggest problem areas in most marriages. You take a look at 1 Corinthians 2:11, and of course I have the text for you here. Who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person? How would you answer that question? Who knows a person's thoughts except the spirit of that person? How would you answer that question? Okay, so God knows, and if you're married to him, then you're in good shape. Okay, because you don't have to explain anything to him. He knows. Okay, who else? No one except, say again? Okay, you know your own thoughts. You're saying God again. He said the Spirit. You're just cheating. So the Father knows, and the Son knows, and the Spirit knows.
What says the spirit of that person?
No, I know. And then I was going to say, and you know. Okay, and who else knows? See, the person you reveal your thoughts to can know your thoughts, but they will not know your thoughts unless you communicate. Nobody in this world is a mind reader. Okay? You have something going on in your mind. If you want the other person to consider it, if you want it to be important, if you want the other person to take that into account, you have to communicate that, or the other person will not know. So also no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. But yes.
I mean, oftentimes we don't address the fact that God made man, and every man has his own spirit.
That's right.
Ecclesiastes 12:7, again, then the dust will return to the earth as it was, and the spirit will return to God who gave it.
That's right.
Every individual has a spirit within them, and I just sometimes often seem like we just don't talk about, even in the context that we're talking, man has a spirit and a woman has a spirit. And between the person's thoughts, minds, and their own internal spirit, they know what each other are thinking and doing, and sometimes they work contrary to each other.
Yeah, so that's a good point. I mean, it would probably take a lot of work to go through exactly how all that stuff might work together, but man is made up of more than one element. We have an earthly element. We know that God fashioned man out of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the Bible says man became a living soul. There was something that took up residence inside the housing that was made from the dust of the earth. When Jesus is on the cross, he says, into your hands I commend my spirit. So we know his body went into a tomb, his spirit went elsewhere. We know that when Lazarus dies, the rich man died. We know that the angels came to carry Lazarus to Abraham's bosom. So what did they carry? Because they didn't carry his physical body. So we know that a human being is made up of more than one element. Now, how all that works together is, I think, something that we don't know quite as much about. But the point that he's making here, I don't think, is that there's necessarily a separation between what's going on in your mind and what's going on in your spirit. He's saying what's happening in your mind, who knows what's happening in your mind except your internal self. Okay, whatever's rattling around in my brain, until I release it into the world, I'm the only one who knows what's happening in my brain. God knows, of course, but no other human being can know. And one of the reasons I say that is because, you see, he says, no one comprehends the thoughts of God except the Spirit of God. Now, how much separation are we going to make between God and the Spirit of God? I understand these three being one in some way that I can't perfectly articulate. And in the same way, the human being is made up of more than one component, still one being, but made up of more than one component. If I parallel those, that's why I say I don't know the dynamics are like really very distinct. It's just saying the internal man is the only one who knows what's going on in the internal man's mind. Anyhow, David Dawkins, this is another guy who writes in the marriage, writes about marriage and relationships. Many of us do not seek healthier ways of communicating because we're not aware that what we're doing is destroying the integrity of our marriages. What do y'all think about that? You think most people, whether they're younger or older, you think most people are thinking, you know what, I am a destructive communicator. But have you ever seen anybody who is a destructive communicator? What's wrong with y'all? Y'all have seen that here. I'm not speaking from personal experience. I feel absolutely certain you have seen that here. But you could not convince that person that the way they are trying to communicate is destructive. You couldn't convince them of it. You couldn't convince them that as soon as they start talking, they cause other people to shut down or feel defensive or feel insulted. You couldn't do that in this building. There are folks who probably have those kinds of destructive patterns of communication, and when you bring it to their attention, they have no clue what you're talking about. Now, somebody's married to that person. The point is, most people don't come into the world as star communicators, but they think they are. Right? I've met some people who say, you know what, I'm just not a very good communicator, but they're the minority. Most of us think we got it and gone and everybody else needs to catch up. But that's not really the way this works, okay? So, but if you think like that, I'm really good at communicating with your non-talking self, okay, with your hollering self, then you're not going to try to do better. So we have to first kind of be open to the idea that I could probably do better. That however good it is that I think I am, there probably is some room for me to improve as a communicator. And if I can improve as a communicator, then it's probably going to help my marriage. As important as I say to you communication is, the reason I'm highlighting this is because as important as it is, I don't find that most people spend much time trying to improve their communication. They just become comfortable with the idea that we just go long periods of time without talking, or we just become comfortable with the idea that, you know, if I say this, she's going to get loud, so I just won't say it. Or we just kind of settle into these patterns that are not really constructive and we just accept it. We're not trying to do better. Well, I want us to at least think about the idea that we could do better. All right, so this is, I actually did some coursework in communication. So what I'm about to show you, it may seem a bit technical, but I'm going to try to make a point with what I'm going to show you next. But I say to you, human communication is complex, more complex than we give it credit for. It is oftentimes suboptimal, meaning we're not doing it as well as we could or should. And every person can improve as a communicator through careful communication about sending messages, receiving messages, and the influences that are surrounding the sending and receiving of messages. So communication is just a sending and receiving of messages. But we think, well, if I say it, then the other person's just supposed to understand perfectly what's happening in my mind. Or they are not good listeners. Or if the other person, I'm listening, so if the other person would just say what's on their mind, I would receive it perfectly. So if I'm not receiving it perfectly, they're not good communicators. That's kind of how we tend to think about this. It's just more complex than that. And this is what I wanted to show you. Now, you may not be able to read this, but I want to just kind of explain to you what is going on when you have a simple exchange in a marriage about some mundane thing. What do you want to eat for dinner? Some simple thing like that. There's all kinds of stuff happening in that simple exchange. Now, for example, you have two parties, so I label these communicator A and communicator B. And these two parties have all kinds of things happening inside of them that shape how they send and receive messages. So you probably can't read that, but perception influences. There I have gender, experiences, geography, education, worldview, race, class, age. Like all of these things influence the way I send and receive messages. You know what? Men and women, not exactly the same. I know that it's earth-shattering stuff. Men and women not exactly the same, and I don't want to do like the stereotypical thing, but I'm just going to say to you that when you speak in broad categories, men and women tend to work a little differently, okay? People of different ages tend to work a little differently. People from different regions tend to work a little differently. People who were brought up different ways tend to work a little differently. All of that is at play in trying to understand, send messages and receive messages and trying to understand. Okay, now in addition to that, you also have inside of a person's mind what I'll call noise. Things that are not necessarily germane to what we're talking about, but it's going on. Just think of, like you have an alarm on your phone and it's just kind of going off in the background. It's going off. Do you hear it? Okay, you hear it. Now, can you watch television and leave it on? You can. But is it a different experience if you turn it off? I can listen to what's going on the television and leave the noise on, but if I turn the noise off, it's a different experience. Y'all tracking with me so far? So that's just what's happening inside of me. Now, the same things that are happening inside of me are happening inside of the other person at the same time. So I have my own perception influences, I have my own noise, and when I speak to my wife, she has her perception influences, she has her noise. All around me, there's also noise. So there are other things vying for my attention, there's other things that might be distractions to me. When my wife, sometimes, we would talk if I'm watching a game or something, now she thinks it's a good time to have a conversation. And she'll say like, I need you to turn that off. And I said, listen, I can hear everything you're saying. I can hear everything you're saying. But there is noise, and it does affect how I take in whatever's going on. Noise all around me, and it is a hindrance to some degree. Now, all noise is not the same. All of it is not as demanding, but it is a hindrance to some degree. I have my noise. She has her noise. And then in between the two of us, if she speaks to me or I speak to her, there's also noise. So it may be that I have something going on I'm in this room and she's in that room and we're trying to speak, and you know what? My son is in his room and he's playing music, or he's in his room and he's on his game with the headset on, and he cannot understand that everybody in the house doesn't need to hear him talk about his game. They're hollering back and forth to each other. There's all kinds of stuff going on. Now, what am I saying? All my wife wants to know, she's calling from the kitchen, what do you want for dinner? That's all she wants to know. I'm saying, even something that simple, there's a lot going on. And if that's the conversation we want to have, what do we want for dinner, then we may not really be too worried about it. We can get through that, because I don't want to get up and you don't want to walk in here. So we'll just compete with the noise and we'll have that conversation. But now there's some conversations where those dynamics would not allow us to effectively communicate. You're tracking with me so far? All right. There's a lot. Now, another thing I put on here, I put in the corner here, the larger context, the time, the place, the social climate. If my wife were to say, well, she doesn't do this anymore, but I'm saying if she were to say, like, if I'm in the middle of watching something, she say, you know, let's talk about this. I'm like, well, I mean, is this the best time, you know, to talk about that? I mean, if it's something that really demands my attention in this moment, then that's okay. But if it's not, like, man, I don't know. I'm trying to watch Star Trek and you're talking like, I got, you know, this was years ago, but I did watch the Star Trek. The timing matters. The timing matters. You know, you come home, you had a long day at work, and now you want to talk about some problem. I mean, I just walked in the door. The timing matters. So I used to say, listen, I need 30 minutes. When I walk in the door, we can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but I need 30 minutes. I have to decompress. I've been out here dealing with these heathens. I came home on the train. You know, I just was happy to get through the door, and then as soon as I walk in, you were like, let me tell you this problem. I'm like, wife, I would like 30 minutes. Let me just like change my clothes. Let me just kind of have a drink of water. Let me just sit. The timing matters. Okay, the environment matters. You want to talk about something sensitive, you want to talk about something important. Every place is not as good to have that conversation. You know, yes, ma'am.
This is deja vu for JJ and I, because when we first got married, he would look at those Star Trek reruns.
Okay.
And I tried to talk to him about
good people. So.
Huh?
Even to this day.
And I tried to talk to him about something, and he was like, "Let me watch my Star Trek." I said, "Well, you know what the end is going to be because it's a rerun." And the same thing with coming home. I would get home from work maybe a couple of hours before he did. So when he came home, I'm like, just talking. He would say, "Can you please give me a little bit of time so I can, you know, decompress and whatever." He said, "You had time because you get home and nobody's there, you know, and you have time to do that. But I need the same thing." So I didn't get insulted or anything, but I just didn't realize, you know, that I was doing that.
And I never said she went, I never said that.
Yeah, but just anyway, this is like a background. Thank y'all for that, by the way. This is a background thing to consider. The point of this is when you want to have conversation with your spouse, how important is the conversation you want to have? The more important the conversation is you want to have, the more you need to consider just how dynamic the process is for you to try to get something important out of your mind and into their mind. And if it's something simple, like what do you want for dinner, maybe this stuff doesn't matter. If it's something more important, then you need to give these kinds of things more consideration. Okay, and I think sometimes we just don't do that. And you know, like if I know that my wife has had a long day, that's not the time for me to start telling her about something that I don't like. It's not the best time. I didn't say there's anything wrong with me conveying that information to her. I just have to consider all the noise that might be happening in the background that she has going on if I want it to be effective. You know, you want to tell your husband, you know, that, you know, you're pretty tired of him leaving his stuff in the floor. Okay, well, you should tell him that. You should tell him that. You probably don't want to tell him that as soon as he like comes in from a 12-hour shift though, right? It's just probably not the very best time. Leave him a note. You know what? He's leaving, and you give him his kiss goodbye. Hope you have a great day. I hope you have a great day. Be on your best behavior at work, and when you come home, don't leave your stuff in the floor. All right? Ephesians 4:29. You guys know this. Let no corrupting talk, corrupt communication, I think the old version says, come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up. What's our word for building up? The old word? Such as is good for edifying, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. We have to pay attention to what we say. It's not enough that what I say is true. I say to people all the time, you can be right and wrong at the same time. Now, what you said might absolutely be true, but how you said it, when you said it, the circumstances under which you said it, all of that can still be wrong. We don't get a pass because the words that we speak are true. I mean, that's a baseline requirement that you don't speak things that are false. We have to make sure that what we're saying is designed to build up the other person. And we have to pay attention to our delivery. We have to make sure that it's designed to bring forth grace in the lives of other people. Yes, ma'am.
So in my younger, more selfish days in early marriage, I had a hard time with this whole concept because I felt as though this one sister would always say to me, you can be right or you can be righteous. And I was a young Christian as well, so I didn't understand that I was truly striving to be righteous. I just wanted to be right because, you know, my mom said you start the way you finish the way you start. So I had to tell him and get him told that this is the way we're going to do things, not the right attitude. I get that now. So, but and then she would also say about fitting the occasion and being kind. And I was like, well, you're telling me to manipulate him. I don't want to be manipulative. Which is strange, you know, you would think that I would jump on that because I want it my way. But now I recognize that it's about truly edifying and encouraging and just being wise and discerning. And I think it's just amazing the way that God designed all of this with the idea of a covenant, that we're doing all this to work together and to build up the kingdom and not ourselves.
That's right. That's right. And like this idea, just, you remember, of course, these principles here, I say to you that this stuff here is important to keep in mind so that you can design your speech in a way that it does this. That's the point of just, it's not just about me conveying facts to the other person. I'm trying to say what needs to be said that's going to be helpful for building up the other person and helping our relationship. And in order to do that, I just have to consider the environment and the circumstances and the way I say it so that I can accomplish that purpose. All right? We have to be diligent. Good communication requires planning because of the dynamics that are involved. And the initiating spouse should think seriously about how to translate his or her feelings into words that will truly and properly impact his or her spouse. I want to help build you up, so I have to make sure that I'm thinking about how what I'm going to say is going to do that and what's the best way to accomplish that. Let's take a look at these verses, Ecclesiastes 3 and 7 and Colossians 4 and 6. Ecclesiastes 3 and 7.
A time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak.
All right. Now, he says here that there is a time for us to keep silent and a time to speak. What does that mean in the context of what we're talking about here, our communication? What does that mean? Yes, sir. It's not a trick question, y'all.
Just like you said, you have to make sure the airwaves are fertile before you throw something out there.
Yeah.
Or else it's not going to be received, or possibly could be received in the intent that was not intended.
See, now when he says there's a time, I got a hand back here too. He says there's a time to keep silent. Do you think that means there's a time when you should have nothing to say? There's a time when you should have no opinion. Charles in the back there. When you should have no opinion? Now what that means is, though you have opinions, though you think there is something you could say, you ought to have enough sense to know this is not the best time to say it. Yes, sir.
You know, I was always told to taste your words before you let them go, because once you let those things go, it doesn't matter what. You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You really can't. And I've been a victim of my big mouth, putting my foot in my mouth so many times. And sometimes it almost be as though people used to almost expect it out of me. But I had to learn time to speak, time to shut up. Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 4 to study to be quiet. So sometimes we got to study to be quiet.
That's right. Anybody else? There are plenty of times when I tell people, when I don't say something, it's not because I don't have anything to say. I have opinions like just probably everybody. I have opinions about everything. I have opinions about everything. I just don't think my opinion matters any more than anybody else's opinion. But now if I'm dealing with my wife, then I think we have to share our opinions because we're living a life, building a life together. But even with my wife, I don't think I have to tell her my opinion on everything. If I feel like I need to say something, there's a time to speak. And if I feel like I need to speak, I'm not going to be shy about speaking. But I don't have to say something about everything.
If she asks, you'll speak too then, right?
If she asks, yeah, if she asks, but sometimes she'll ask and I say, well, now wait a minute, now you sure you want to? Because if I tell you, I'm going to tell you the truth, okay? Now I wasn't going to say anything. Are you sure you want me to? Okay, then I'll tell you what I think. Yeah. All right. Colossians 4 and 6. We didn't get that one.
Let your speech be always with grace, seasoned with salt, that ye may know how ye ought to answer every man.
Who does that apply to, by the way? Because I know Paul is writing to the church at Colossae, and who is he talking about? These folks. He's talking about these Christians and how they talk to each other and how they talk to other people, and that's fine. We oftentimes do that. You hear a sermon on speech, you hear a sermon on the tongue, and I know James is not talking about marriage there. Does it apply to marriage? Sometimes we think that we can speak to our spouses in ways that we wouldn't speak to other people. Y'all don't think like that. I'm just saying I've seen that. Where people think that I have to be on my best behavior and watch my speech with the folks down at the church house, with the folks on my job, but then when I come home, I don't have to do that. I think this applies in your marriage too. Right? I think you're supposed to watch how you talk to people. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say you married a person. This didn't stop applying when you got married. It doesn't stop. And what I told you, the dynamic you have is you only have to be on your best behavior for an hour or two at the church building. You only have to be on your best behavior for whatever number of hours it is that you're at work. And then you leave and then you're like, well, now I can let my hair down. And then you get home and you're tired of being on your best behavior. But what's the most important relationship that you have? Now, you're just saying that because you know it's right. You're just saying that. If the most important relationship you have is with your spouse, then shouldn't you be on your best behavior with your spouse? Shouldn't your speech be the most gracious it can possibly be in dealing with this person who is the most important person in the world to you? I'm saying we don't often do it that way, but if I understand the way my Bible works, if it would apply to my spouse, if it doesn't apply to anybody else, it would apply to my spouse. This requires some diligence on our part. Are you raising your hand or are you just moving? Okay, you see, you got to be careful. You got to be careful. All right. Let's take a look at James 1:19. Know this, my beloved brothers, he says, let every person be swift to hear, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Now, this helps me with something. Which is more important in your marriage? Talking or listening? Now, are you sure? Are you sure? He said, be swift to hear. You ought to be in a hurry to hear what your spouse has to say and slow to speak, which kind of makes me think that the other person, what they have to say, should be more important to me than saying what I have to say. Now, eventually, he says slow to speak. He didn't say no to speak, slow to speak. Eventually, I will have to say something, but if we're having a conversation about something that's significant, the most important thing to me in terms of priority should be making sure I understand what the other person has to say, what they can share with me about what's happening in their minds. One of these has to come first, speaking or listening. My inclination should be, I want to hear what you have to say before I tell you what it is that I want to say or what I think we should do. There are degrees of listening. Making an effort to hear somebody and paying attention to them are kind of general concepts, but there are degrees to listening. Some are more appropriate for marital communications than others. When I say there are degrees of listening, you guys understand what I'm talking about? What would you say what we might call listening? I gave you an example. My wife says, you know, can you turn that off? And I say, man, I can hear everything you're saying. That's a low degree of listening. That's what I might call hearing. I can hear the words that you're speaking. I was talking to some younger folks about this. They're a married couple, and I knew the guy, he was watching football or something. His wife was trying to talk to him about something, and she wanted him to turn it off. And he said to her, man, I can hear everything you're saying. I said, well, I understand where the young man is coming from. He can hear everything you're saying. I didn't say that to her, but I'm just thinking to myself, I understand what he's saying. He can hear everything that she's saying. And then he said, not only can I hear what you're saying, I can repeat every word that you said. And he might have been right. That still is a pretty low degree of listening, though. The fact that I just heard the words you spoke and could repeat those words back to you. Why would I say that? That's a low degree of listening.
He's not doing what she asked. She's asking him to turn off all the distractions and focus on her, listen to her.
Yeah, so, but if he can hear every word that she says and even repeat every word that she says, what's the problem? You want me to turn this off because you think this is going to mean I'm not going to hear you, but I can hear everything you say. You're going to want me to turn this off because you say I'm not listening, but I can tell you everything you just said to me. So what's the problem? Okay. Y'all didn't hear that. He said there's more to be, they heard you, but the YouTube didn't hear you. There's more to be gained than just the words. I see this man moving his hand.
So my wife works with autistic children, and she works with some children who they can repeat everything she says to them. They don't understand anything about what it means.
Okay.
So you can repeat back what your wife said. That's great. You're functioning at the level of an autistic child. I mean, come on.
I really like that example. That is the lowest level of listening. The fact that I hear what you said and can repeat it. So if I were to, like, this is just to illustrate what he's saying here. When I teach my law students in criminal law, we talk about all kinds of crimes. We talk about homicide, and I will tell them a criminal homicide is an unlawful killing. An unlawful killing is a killing without justification or excuse. Murder is the willful, deliberate, premeditated killing of a human being by another. Now, that is not exceptionally deep material for somebody who knows what I'm talking about. But I could say that to you, and if I said it slower, if I repeated it a couple times, you could repeat it back to me, and you still wouldn't have a clue what I was saying. Right? Repeating the words is not what we're after when we communicate with people. It's a very low level of listening is my point. Yes, sir.
I totally agree with what you said.
But
in the military, when you work in the engineering department and it's very noisy, the way you communicate what you want done is they'll announce orders. You're supposed to call back and repeat back you get an order over the sound-powered phone, you're supposed to repeat it back. That's how they know you understood what they said.
That's
So
how they know you heard what they said.
that's true.
That's
And
the
that's all you
lowest.
can assume. But you assume that once they hear it and repeat it back, they understand what it meant.
Ah, see, but now this is the good part. You assume that. Because somebody, if I said to you, murder, willful, deliberate, premeditated killing of a human being by another. I'll slow down, I say it 2 or 3 times, you say it back to me. Should I assume that you understand what that is?
Well, maybe not. In the military, you give orders that are consistent all day long. The same kind of light off number 2 coolant charging pump. They know exactly what that means. So it's orders that get repeated back constantly. It's not like, hey, let's have a discussion about what we're going to do for dinner. It's repeated orders that you do over and over. And that's how you know the person received the communication you got. And based on the training, they're supposed to understand exactly what that means.
Yeah. So I do understand what you're saying, but let me be more specific about what I'm saying.
Oh, I understand what you're saying.
No, you don't. I didn't say it yet. I didn't say it yet. I didn't say it yet. What I'm about to say, I didn't say yet. There is a context in which what you're saying you can assume is understood. Just like there's a context for when I have that conversation with my class in law school. There's a context. There's a lot of background and so forth that has gone into that. And so we can use certain kinds of terminology and definitions and so forth in that context. And based on that context, it's okay for me to assume that they understand. That would be the same as in your military context, you have shared training and experiences and so forth. But what I'm saying to you is the mere repetition of what is said means that they heard you, and then you had said, so you assume they understand, but you only assume they understand because of your shared context. It is dangerous to assume that people who don't have your shared context understand what you're saying. It's dangerous to assume that. So when you have in a marriage relationship, you can communicate a lot of things in shorthand because we've been married for 10 years, we've been married for 15 years, we've been through certain things, we've had certain conversations before, and so we can shorthand a lot of things, and maybe in that circumstance, I'm entitled to assume that you understand. But when a person announces to you that they want to have an important conversation, I want you to turn this off, turn that off. My wife has this thing, she's like, I want you to look at me. I'm like, woman, the words are going to sound the same if I'm like staring at you or not staring at you. I hear you perfectly. Okay, wife, go ahead. Okay, are we good now? Go ahead. But she thinks it's because she's not trying to give me words that I can repeat. She's after 2 things. We assume just the base level that she can understand that I can understand the English language. We assume that, okay, good. She wants me to understand what she's trying to get out of her mind into my mind. And she wants me to feel how she feels about what she's trying to get out of her mind into my mind. That's the reason that she might say, I would like you to turn the television off. Woman, I got my brain here. You can say whatever you want to say. I'm used to taking in information. I can regurgitate it back to you, but you know what? You don't understand what I'm saying. You don't understand because you're not even looking at me. You're not paying attention. You see what I mean? That's a different kind of conversation. And this is the kind of communication that I'm talking about. The further we move down the pendulum of important conversations and topics, the more important it will be to eliminate distractions and to make sure we set a time aside and a circumstance aside so that people can give their full attention, not just to the words, but to the meaning of the words and the impact of the conversation. We could talk about something that's fairly simple, like who's going to pick up the kids today? And for some people, men in particular, it might be a matter of exchanging data. Like that's the level that I tend to focus on. I just need to know what time. My wife will start talking and she'll say, well, I got to do this and I got to do that and I got to do this. And I'm just waiting patiently. Did you say a time? Because I literally can't do anything with what you just said until I get that bit of data. Like, that's the level that I'm trying to communicate on. I just want the information. She's trying to do something different than I'm trying to do, though. She's trying to explain to me how all this is going to impact her, make her feel. She's trying to give me an understanding of how all of this is going to affect her. These are just different levels of communication, and people tend to communicate on different levels. The one requires more work than the other one. Yes, sir.
You know, as you were talking, I was just thinking about you can't receive the affect of what someone is saying if you're not looking at them and paying attention. For example, my wife can say to me,
now she's sitting right next to
right, my brother is feeling very ill. And let's say she could be in the other room and I can say, okay, yes, your brother's feeling very ill. But if I'm looking at her, I can see how it is impacting her, and it may need to garner more of my attention as to what she just said.
That's right. We communicate more non-verbally than we do verbally. See, Sister Frazier got her hand.
It kind of reminds me of text messaging, where, you know, you don't see the person, you don't hear the inflection in the voice or anything, so something can sound one way when it was totally meant to be another way. And so maybe when a person wants you to look at them, they feel like if you see their expressions and their body language and all this kind of stuff, that it would make it more understandable maybe about what they're trying to say. I'm not sure.
That's right. Now, the question I want to ask y'all, which of these levels, I think there's at least three. One of them is just information sharing. The other one would be achieving an understanding of some principle or something like that. And then the highest one would be communicating how a person feels or is affected by whatever it is that's being discussed. Which of those you think is the most important? The last one, the third one, communicating how you feel about or are affected by something. Everybody pretty much agree on that? Y'all not saying nothing. Okay. Now, how long can you do that? In the course of your day, for what period of time do you think you can communicate on that level of undistracted engagement and focus, where you're trying to understand, hear the words, understand the meaning, and perceive how all of this is impacting someone? How long a period of time do you think you can do that? 10%. Okay, 10% minutes at a time? Yes, sir. I heard you, but he's going to get to you because YouTube can't hear you.
Because your day is so different, there's no day where you could sit down 100% of the time and give that kind of attention to somebody who will never get anything done.
Okay, so you're saying you have other things you have to do. Okay, and is it a crime to have other things you have to get done? Okay, but now let's say, were you raising your hand, sister? Are you just right there in front of me? I saw that. I saw that. I think you might have went up and down and back up again. Okay, I was going to let you go the first time. Okay, so we do have other things we have to do in life. If we didn't, it still requires a significant amount of energy to listen on that level. We all have, I moved my chart here, we all have noise in our own minds, around us, in the larger environment. And at some point, that noise is going to require our attention. Why do I point this out? I find that some people err in that they do not want to listen on this level, communicate on this level at all, that's a tremendous mistake. We can't walk together except we be agreed. We're not going to be agreed just based on exchanging data, okay? Some people err, though, on the side of thinking that all listening has to occur on this higher level, and that's not realistic. It's just not realistic. People have to do other things. You know what? There's children in the house. They have to be taken care of. There is a limit on how much I'm going to be able to stop and focus on you before I have to break off and go do something else. I do have to go to work. I'm sorry. If I don't repair this roof, the house is going to fall in. You got 5 minutes because the roof is falling in. There's just going to be other things that demand our attention sometime. So as a practical matter, most of your communication during the course of a day is going to be on this lower level. What time you getting off work? What time you getting home? Can you stop and pick this up? I can't make it to get the kids. Can you get the kids? Okay, fine. It's going to be a lot of stuff on that level, and there's nothing wrong with that. When you need to go above that level, this is what I want to just suggest to you is an important thing for you to think about in your own marriage. When you want to communicate above that level, you should announce that that's what you want to do. When you need somebody's attention more than what you're just normally expecting their attention to be throughout the course of the day, because they don't know that. They don't know what's in your mind. They don't know that what you're about to say is more important to you than the other things you're saying throughout the course of the day. To be fair to that person, you should announce to them that you need their time and you need their attention. You can't demand it all the time, okay? But you should tell them, I need us to talk about X. And I'm going to need a few minutes for us to talk about X. That way they can shut the phone off, they can turn the TV off, they can do what they got to do to make sure they're there for that. And then you have to understand that they can't do that all night. Nobody can. Nobody can. Now, I don't know if y'all feel like y'all can. I know I can't. There just is a limit on my ability to focus on something to that extent, to the exclusion of everything else. Yes, sir.
You know, as you were just talking about that, this light bulb just came on. You know, and in my job, I deal with a lot of emails. I deal with, managing people that are all across the United States. But it's when someone calls me, like someone said earlier, an email can say, it just exchanges information. There's no really human connection to it. It's just letters and words on an exchange. But when someone calls me, it pulls my attention to that phone call, away from all other multitasking. That's the point I was getting at, is that I feel like that we multitask in so many other arenas that it sometimes drifts over into how we communicate at home. And when you're multitasking, you can't be honed in on what the one individual is saying and focusing.
Yeah. We're kind of impatient as a society overall. The text messaging and stuff, that kind of helps us with that. But that's why I just say, listen, I do that with my children. We're just talking all day long, but when I really need to communicate something to one of them, I say, man, come here for a second. Close the door. I want to talk to you about X. Now, they know this is a different conversation because most of the time I'm like, who left the refrigerator door open? Somebody need to wash these towels. Somebody take out the trash. But when I say, listen, I need you to come in here, man. I'm concerned about something. And I mentioned it a couple of times, and I feel like maybe it hasn't registered with you the way I was hoping it would. I'm thinking that if I talk to you about it this time, we should not have to discuss it again. I'm kind of trying to help them understand this is a different conversation than these other times. Why wouldn't you do that with your spouse? Now, it's not going to be the same way that I talk to my child, but if I need to talk to my wife, I said, listen, I kind of have a concern about something. We kind of talked about it a couple of times, but I'm still concerned about this. And I mean, I know you got something to do. You can do what you need to do, but at some point, I'd like us to talk about this, and you let me know when you think it might be good. Now, when she tells me she's ready to talk about it, I expect to have her full attention, right? Not just barking things in passing and expecting all of a sudden that the person is going to treat that differently than something else. Y'all tell me where I'm going wrong. Tell me what I'm missing. All right, so a couple of quick things here. You got to try to understand when it comes to communication, it's a more dynamic process than people give it credit for. Saying things is not necessarily all that's required for high-level communication. And everything in your marriage cannot demand the other person's full attention. That's unreasonable for you and it's unreasonable for them. But when you know that there is something that does require more substantive engagement because you don't want just information, you're trying to achieve understanding, you're trying to make somebody understand how you feel, you want them to understand how something is impacting you, you should prepare for that. Don't have those conversations haphazardly. You should prepare for that. And that just requires us to respect the dynamics of communication. People give their whole careers to studying communication. It's a big deal. Writing all kinds of books. It's a big deal. Most of us think we do it really well. Most of us don't. Okay? Now, when you're communicating, you have to respect the appropriate dynamics for it. I mean, be diligent about respecting the dynamics of it. So we understand in some sense how this is going to work, and then we also need to understand how God expects me to engage with other people. I need to be minded to do a lot of listening, not waiting to talk. Listening, trying to understand what this other person is trying to convey to me. And then when I do speak, I need to make sure that what I'm saying is designed to edify and build up the other person. I have to season my speech so that it's gracious speech. I talk to a lot of people sometimes. They say, well, you know, I'm just kind of direct. That's just how I am. I say, okay, that's fine. Nothing wrong with being direct. Does that mean you have to be unkind? Being direct? Because I'm a direct person. But that's not an excuse for being unkind. It's not an excuse for being impatient. You can be honest and still be kind and still be patient. So there's a lot of biblical principles about the tongue and so forth that we have to keep in mind. Those apply in marriage just like everything else. And as I say, there just are these degrees of listening. Be reasonable in your expectations. Every time somebody says something to you, they shouldn't have to make eye contact every time they say something to you. Okay? But there are times where, yeah, you need to stop what you're doing and give your full attention to what your spouse is saying and what they're not saying, how they feel about what it is. And that's not going to solve everything, but I can tell you that it will go a long way to helping toward a healthy resolution. Questions and thoughts about any of that? This is the time to tell me that I missed the whole thing, missed the boat.
I think you're point on with everything. I just wanted to share something. When I was probably about 15 years ago, I learned that I wasn't a good listener, and I'll tell you how. When your child wants you to listen to them, they could just say something out in a room, in a different room, and feel like that you've heard them. But when they really want your attention, they'll pull your face so you're looking at them when they talk to you. That's when you know you're not a good listener, because they have to do that. And at that point, you learn that you've got a lot of learning to do, not just with your children, but also with your spouse. And not just your spouse, but anyone you communicate with, whether it be a coworker or, you know, anybody else, your neighbor. That you don't ever really finish learning how to communicate. And once we think that we have learned every lesson, that's when we start to become deaf to communication again.
Okay.
And I think also as we grow older, we have to adapt to new ways to communicate, because the old ways don't always continue to work, especially when our hearing goes out.
Okay.
A lot more can be said when you look at someone when they're talking to you than just listening.
That's right. Anybody else? Should we get ready? Okay, here she is. See, I knew this woman. She had something to say. She had something to say. Okay. All right.
I just want to say that I really appreciate you sharing the idea of announcing when you want to have a deeper conversation, allowing the other person to prepare for it. I think we need to be mindful sometimes of when we have something on our minds, our hearts, and we're mulling over it all day long. You know, we're having these conversations to ourselves, and then we just drop it on the other person. They may be miles away from what you're talking, what you're thinking about, what you want to talk about, and so sometimes it could put them in the place of defense. Like, whoa, where is this coming from, right? But I like the idea of announcing. You know, I like to talk about this issue. So now they have time to prepare. They can get their mind right. They can get their spirit right. Like, okay, we're going to have this deeper conversation about this, preparing themselves to be willing to listen and, you know, really try to understand you. So I really like that suggestion to announce that to that person to help them to prepare. And I think one of the other thing I thought about is just when you are the communicator and you're sharing, you know, your heart and, you know, just understanding that some people's, you know, I guess attention span is, you know, a few minutes maybe. But if you're going on and kind of rambling, right, you have to understand sometimes their mind is going to drift because you're going too long on the point. Or even just stopping and saying, you know, do you have, you know, a comment, or would you like to say something at this point? To give them some time to re-engage and not just have to sit and listen for a long time because you're going so long. So sometimes we can talk too long where we lose that person still.
Yeah, that's a great point. We men everywhere appreciate you making that point. Making that point for us. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So I really wish I could have said this before Ty said it, because the whole time I kept thinking, because just in the conversation where I am one of those who, I mean, everything you were saying, I kept thinking about, boy, that's me, that's me, that's me, that's me. But one of the things I was thinking is, a lot of times I'm always saying, well, can you turn it off, or can you look at me, or whatever. But I do realize that a lot of times when I do talk, I'm talking on and on and on and on. And he's like, I think you said the same thing 3 times, babe. And I'm like, no, I didn't. You know, but then I'll say, you know, I'll think about, you know, when he's having somebody's talking to him on the job or something else, he could be on the phone for like an hour, 2 hours, and he's fully engaged. And so I'm thinking, well, that should be how you should be engaged with me, you know. And sometimes you say, yeah, but they've said the point one time. You said yours 3 or 4 times. I was like, no, I didn't. No, I didn't. No, I didn't. So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like, well, do you really care about what I have to really say?
Okay.
And that's one of the things I wanted to mention, is that sometimes and I'm talking about for me, I'm not going to say for everybody else may be different, and I'm just more sensitive. But I guess when you have TV on, you're not fully engaged when we're talking, I don't think you really care about what I have to say. So if I have to ask you to do A, B, C, and D to talk to me, and then I only have this amount of time, even though people say, well, keep it short, I'm thinking, but in the world out there or any other world, if they need 2 hours of your time, they're going to get 2 hours of your time. If I need 2 hours, why do I have to break mine down to 15 minutes, you know, or 20 minutes, because you can't stay focused? And I'm not saying that he does that constantly, but when I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm thinking, but I have to keep mine this short when your job or your world of whatever can get this time.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm confused at how in communication, and maybe I'm being selfish. Maybe it's a selfish part of me that I want all that time. If I announce it and I need an hour, can I have that hour?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Maybe I'm seeing it differently. Maybe I'm being selfish about it. But I guess, I mean, that's how I've always. I mean, I may be just a special case because when he, before he started working remotely, I mean, I would call him like 7 times a day and just want to have a talk.
At work?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
So that's why, that's why it was hard for me to put my hand up because I'm just a special case.
Okay. I'm sorry. I was just trying to get clarification. I'm sorry.
So that's why I'm like, but maybe it's just me because yes, I do. I'll just call this and say hello, and then sometimes I'll call and say, okay, I'm putting your kids on the roof today. I mean, it's just all different things. But I'll call him 6, 7 times, and he's like, I'm in the bathroom. I'll call you back. I'm like,
okay. He might not have wanted you to go on that last part. Herman, do you want to defend yourself or? Yeah, go ahead, help yourself out.
No, the point you were mentioning about the appropriateness of turning the TV off when you're doing something. Like I said, there are certain times, like I said, with 2 minutes left in the game,
Yeah.
in the red zone. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not the time to come
That's
and
not
say,
the time.
turn it off right now. I'll talk to you. I mean, there's an appropriateness, and you got to understand that with just in terms of knowing each other and say, well, man, the game came on at 4 o'clock. We were here from 12 to, 3:30. Why, all that time we had, why didn't you talk to me about it then? But we didn't tell the most critical time to say whatever. And sometimes it's a challenge to say that, but I want to test to see if you really care about me more than that. It's not about that all the time.
Yeah.
But see, I don't know football, so I don't know the red zone versus 2 minutes. Because sometimes they say 2 minutes and it's an hour.
With timeouts. You got timeouts.
Stuff like that.
Stop the clock for certain plays, timeouts. Okay. Listen, what you guys are touching on, though, is a really important aspect of this, is knowing your spouse. Like, everybody's not the same. So for me, when my wife and I were dating, she would be at work and I would be at work. She would call me at work. I'm not going to be a good conversation at work because I'm working. Like, my mind is like, if I talk to you for 10 minutes, I have to be here 10 minutes longer. I would much rather talk to you when I leave at the right time. Or I have all these demands, people coming in my office asking me to do things and stuff like that. I really can't give you undivided attention. There's too much noise. If you just want to call and say hi, okay, but if you want to have a substantive conversation, you have to alert me that it's necessary for me to break off what I'm doing. So like if my wife now is a little more relaxed, but she will sometimes call and I won't answer the phone if I don't see the phone or something like that, or she'll text and say, I need to talk to you. Okay, well now I know whatever I'm doing, bro, you're gonna have to wait and let me see what the wife wants and we can do it that way. But everybody's built differently. That would not work real well for me to be called several times during the day. I'm just not really well built for that. And like I have my little things, like I say, when I walk in the door, I kind of want, now once we had the kids, I kind of lost my 30 minutes, okay? Because you can't tell them you need 30 minutes, okay? But I have certain things, it's not that I'm trying to not be available to you, I'm not going to be able to give the quality communication time that you want under certain circumstances. And I think everybody has some things like that. And you have to know that about your spouse, and you have to consider that. You have to consider that. I don't think it's unreasonable if there's a conversation that requires 2 hours of engagement. It's not unreasonable. I just don't know if there are that many conversations. I don't know. I don't know if there are that many that require 2 hours. My brother here has his hand up. That require that. But if it's just, really significant life things happen. You know what? In 2019, my grandmother died. My wife's grandmother died here really not very long ago. And there's all kinds of stuff that comes up along the way, family dynamics and stuff like that. And some of those conversations might be 2 hours. There might be significant things that need to be addressed in the relationship, significant things that need to be addressed. Some of those conversations might be 2 hours. Yes, sir.
Well, first, I do appreciate the spirit of her question, and it takes me back to a time where you really got to know each other. For example, I'm an early morning person, so if I want my wife to talk at 5 a.m. in the morning, that's likely not going to happen. On the same token, if she wants me to talk at 10 p.m. at night, and she gets mad at me because I'm falling asleep, well, it's because I don't have any energy at 10 p.m. at night. And so just understanding each other and the makeup thereof really helps in that aspect. But I do want to tell you today, I really appreciate in the communication segment where you mentioned not just be an active listener instead of getting ready to talk. And so I truly appreciate that, because it's a whole different engagement in another function of the brain where you're not actively listening, but you're just waiting to talk.
That's right.
So appreciate that.
Stephen Covey, in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he says, seek first to understand, then to be understood. I won't give myself permission to start trying to help you understand something until I understand what you're saying. So you're gonna have to tell me, I'm gonna have to clarify. So you're saying it's this and you're saying it's that. And now once I feel like I get it, you feel comfortable that I understand, then I'm in a position to respond. Not until then, slow to speak. I need to take my time and make sure, yes ma'am, that I understand what you're trying to share with me.
I like the scripture you were had up there about no one knows what's in your mind but the Spirit.
That's right.
And in some people's relationships, they'll get upset with their spouse about something because they say, well, he should know that I don't like this, or she should know whatever. I mean, there are things that you know about your spouse that they don't like, but they can't read your mind. Their thoughts are not the same as yours. So if it's something that you need or that you don't like, then you should, express that to them, and not assume that they just know these things.
Okay. Were you raising your hand, sister? Okay, so I saw was. Yes, ma'am. We got one back here. Sister Brooke. I saw you move, though. You did move. All right. I saw you. I saw that. Yes, ma'am.
I used to be a member of a support group, and the leader of that support group, whenever she set a meeting, if that meeting was supposed to start at 6, it started at 6, whether she and I were the only two there or not. If it's supposed to end at 7, it ended at 7. I heard a counselor say some time ago that when couples are in those serious conversations, set yourself a time limit. And it could be 10 minutes. She suggested 10 minutes. If you can't get it out in 10 minutes, it probably doesn't need to be said at that time. So it might need to be more than 10 minutes for some people, but I think that's a good measuring stick to whatever the couple decides, whether ours is 10, 20, or 30. Because going in long conversations can wear the other person out. And then, again, as I said earlier, you're no longer productive. So whether it's 10, 20, or 30, I think that's something that couples should decide on between the two of them and then stick to that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Now, there's lots of techniques that you can use. I mean, I would even say, I mean, that person's a professional. I mean, I would say if you're going to talk for 10 minutes, I'm not going to make it the whole 10 minutes of listening. That's a lot of talking. I've heard people say you can have a timer because some people have issues with one person trying to dominate the conversation and another person can't get anything in edgewise. And I've heard people say, you can have a timer. Each person gets 2 minutes and alternate. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. And if there are challenges in your marriage in this respect, you should talk about it. It's one thing to say, I think it would be good for us to spend time with this other couple. That's information. You could say, I think we should spend some time with this other couple because I think we can learn a lot from them. It'd be helpful for us. Okay. Now, you've not only given the information, you've also given the reason behind it. You could say, we are having this particular struggle, and I think we should spend time with this couple because they're an older, experienced couple, and I believe they can help us with this struggle that we have. Now, one of those I think is a little more compelling than the other two. Now, can I tell you what's more compelling than either of those? We are in trouble in our marriage. We need help. I believe they can help us. We've been too isolated. We don't have anybody to talk to be real with, to share what's really going on with us. And I believe they can help us. And I think we need to be closer with them. I think we need to try to spend more time with them. Those are some very different kinds of statements. And depending on how you say it, you know, the kind of engagement and response you get, I would think, could reasonably be different. If my wife said to me, I'd like to spend some time with them, okay, well, I'm sure we will. Right? I mean, I appreciate it. I think that's great that you want to do that. And I'll bet you at some point it'll happen. But if she starts up that ladder there, but you know, no matter what I'm doing, if she were to announce to me, I think we're in some trouble here. I'm concerned about the way things are going. It's not going to work like this. Those are some different kinds of things. And if she wants to have that conversation with me, that's probably not one to drop on me as we're walking out of the church building or as I'm, you know, trying to watch the game, or these are not. So y'all see what I'm saying? I'm just trying to give you concrete examples. There's levels of communication, and if she wants to have that other conversation with me, that last one that I mentioned, she needs to let me know that. Don't drop that on me while I'm in the middle of working. I don't think that's fair to me, right? But if she announced to me that I think we're in some trouble and we should have a conversation, I think I ought to have enough common sense to know I got to turn the TV off. I'm going to have to look at this woman in the eyes at least sometime while she's getting this out. Marriage demands communication. There's no way around that. Communication works best when we understand the dynamics of communication. It won't hurt you to read a book or two on communication. Read it with your spouse. We have to be diligent in how we send the messages. The person who's sending the message has a responsibility for how the message is being sent. They have the opportunity to decide when, the environment, the circumstances, and all that. So they're responsible for that. The person who's initiating the communication is responsible for making sure that it's initiated in a helpful way. And then the person who is hearing has the responsibility to use the appropriate degree of listening for what is being said. The appropriate degree of listening for what is being said. And there are a lot more details to it than that, but I think that's where we'll stop for now in terms of our primer on marital communication. Yes, sir.
You know, when I was taking that course on 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek to understand and then to be understood, they gave us a talking stick. And if you were holding the stick, you talked. When you gave the stick up, it was the other person's turn. And I found that to be very a good tool, because sometimes I felt like I didn't know when to shut up. But when I gave her the stick, then I may not have wanted to hear what I wanted to hear. I may not have heard that, but hey, sometimes it's painful when she got that stick and she's telling you something you don't want to hear. So I found that to be a very effective tool, but one of us lost that stick.
Well, I think we probably know which one of y'all lost it. Okay. All right. Well, listen, I think that's it for today. I don't know who's supposed to be coming back up here. Okay, JJ. So listen, I appreciate you guys' time today. As I said when we started yesterday, I don't really have any magic tricks, just basic things. Some of these things I figure you guys know, you've heard, maybe you haven't thought about in a little bit of while, or you haven't thought about in quite this way. My encouragement to you is the same as when we started. You need to think positively about marriage. Think positively about the institution of marriage and about your marriage. You need to be praying about your marriage. God is in the midst of a marriage relationship. Whether you acknowledge him or not, he is, and you need his help. You need his guidance. You need to pray about your marriage. You need to talk to your spouse about your marriage. Things won't get better if you don't talk about it. And you will need to, at some point, probably talk to other people about your marriage. There's nothing wrong with that. There is no shame whatsoever in that. That's the way God set this thing up. Older women, older men are supposed to counsel, help, tutor, bring along younger people. And sometimes it may not be somebody who's older, just somebody who's got a little more experience than you do. You need help, you should get it. And you should have the kind of mind that will allow you to encourage other people in their marriages. If you see people who need to be encouraged, you see a sister who needs to be helped or a brother who needs to be helped, you ought to have the kind of heart that would lead you to do that. And you need to have the kind of heart that would allow you to receive it when somebody does that for you. If you work like that, be positive and prayerful, and you'll talk and you'll invite and offer help to other people, your marriage is going to be better. How could it not be? Whatever it is today, as great as it is today, it'll be better still if you think like that. Thank y'all for your time.
Amen. Amen. All right. Well, thank you so much, Brother Otey. Wow, this has been not the conclusion, because we still have one more day to go and some more to talk about. So we started off on Friday with a covenant and learning a difference between a covenant and a contract. Awesome discussion. This morning we started off with cultivating that marriage, cultivating our relationships, and we've moved into conflict versus disagreement and understanding the difference between the two. And I mean, it was just wonderful in the breakdown of that. And now we've gone into communication and recognizing that communication is not just with our spouse, but it's with our family members or older members or someone who can help if there is a problem in the relationship. And Brother Otey has done a masterful job in helping us all understand and come to an understanding of what we have, because God has given us a great spouse when he gives us a helpmate. And we want to keep our mates and we want to keep our families together and strengthen them. And so we're just so appreciative, brother, and the things that we've had an opportunity to come in here today. So tomorrow morning, he'll be with us again as we go into kindness. Kindness. Let your minds run wild, because I mean, when you think about the subjects that we've already talked about and then you get to kindness, you know there's so much more that's powerful in helping us understand our relationships with each other and what kindness brings us. And then Brother Otey will also give the sermon tomorrow. And after he leaves and prepares to get on the flight, of course, our own brother Ernest Benjamin will wrap up the entire seminar that afternoon at 6 p.m. So we ask you to please come back, join us, and we're going to have a great opportunity to continue to close out this seminar. I think everything has been, there may be a few more items in the back if you want to take any of those items. I know there's chips back there. If you, muffins, grapes, some of the things from lunch, y'all take them Dunkin' Donuts. Uh, and don't forget those, if you made a to-go, remember to take those out the fridge. We don't want to come back and get them tomorrow. So please take those. So let's go to our Heavenly Father in prayer, and you'll be dismissed. Our precious and Heavenly Father, we just thank you so much, Father, for a glorious day, a glorious message, an opportunity to come and hear your precious word, and to help us in our relationships that we have with our spouses and others if we are not married and we were contemplating marriage. So we just thank you for the things that we've learned, and we ask you, Father, that you allow these things to just let us stew on these things and let us learn and grow from what we've heard. And Father, we ask you now as we leave this place that you take us safely back to our homes and bring us back at the next appointed time. Be with us and guide us all in our affairs through the rest of this day. This we ask in your Son, Jesus Christ's name. Amen. All right, you are dismissed.
I'm gonna get some to-go boxes and see if you want to take them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Reggie, I know you had it. On the way from Lamb.